pastor and founder of the nonprofit Bond, Reverend Jesse Lee Petersen.
Yeah!
Let me just say that in terms of criminal justice reform, as was stated by the moderator, we have more people incarcerated in the United States than any place in the world. And I think we do for a couple of reasons. One, and one of the biggest reasons, is because people really don't have access to affordable legal representation, and a lot of times will accept pleas, and then it's because of the drug laws that were passed in the 80s and the 90s. But what I found when this initiative was launched was that everybody forgot the ladies. Because we incarcerate women, the incarceration rate went up 800% when crack cocaine hit, and now it's spiking again with the opioid crisis. We don't think about why women go to jail. The majority of women go to jail for nonviolent offenses. The majority of women go to jail because of their relationships with men. What people don't often think about is that the majority of women in prison have children. And when we incarcerate women, then the children either go into the foster care system or fall through the cracks. Another statistic that we don't think about very much is that 50% of children who have an incarcerated parent wind up incarcerated. And so there's a lot that we need to do to improve the system. Even if you're concerned about the money government spends billions and billions of dollars incarcerating people. We don't really have to spend the money that way. Legislation I'm working on specifically right now on a bipartisan basis is a bill around pregnant women incarcerated. Do you know that we put women in shackles on their ankles, around their waist, and in their hands when they are in their 8th and 9th month of pregnancy? We also will shackle them to the gurney during labor.
Also, as a conservative, we talk a lot about life. If life is so important to Republicans, then again, you would think the focus would be on making people better versus keeping people in prisons. I think it's fundamentally important for us as a society to have some level of recognition that is clear, at least to me, and I think to most of you guys here in this audience, that there are people in our country, in our society, who are indeed disproportionately impacted by certain things.
What we need to look at is basically, as we strive to create a more perfect union as a nation, we should strive for communities where there are zero police encounters, where there are zero police killings. And basically, we've given police this mandate almost to go out and put themselves into dangerous situations, put themselves into hostile situations, where they're engaging with people who they already come out and say they're dangerous. They're engaging with people who have mental health issues. They're engaging with people who have substance abuse issues, who are on drugs. And you basically create the conditions where you're going to have thousands and thousands of police killings and also police deaths every year when you do this. And so we really need to rethink the basic police citizen encounter, whether we need so many of them, whether we need police patrolling areas at night all the time and getting into these encounters. One of the biggest reforms that has been done in neighborhoods to reduce crime after dark is to put streetlights on. Why don't we think about streetlights instead of police? Why don't we think about things like enabling groups of citizens to actually just have a neighborhood watch, fun neighborhood watches? You said one of the number 2 state budget item has been incarceration. Actually, one of the number 1 municipal budget items has been police. And so we should think about that. Why do we, as a society, accept the fact that we spend the most of our tax dollars, aside from the military, on policing? Do we need that much policing in order to make America safer?
Specifically as it relates to Black Lives Matter, what is your kind of synopsis of the issue, and what do you see as being some of the reforms that we need to make to improve community-police relations?
Thank you. For the last 27 years, I've been running a nonprofit organization called Bond, the Brotherhood Organization of New Destiny, and we are rebuilding the family by rebuilding the man. I work with gang members, I work with men from single-parent homes, and we work with all men. I work with men who are in and out of jail, and I have to tell you that the police is not the problem. It's the criminals who are the problem, and the leadership who are brainwashing the criminals to make them believe that the police is the problem. We're trying to stop a bill right now, SB 10, and SB 10 would get rid of bail bonds, and the criminals would be able to hang out in the communities after they rape, rob, murder. They don't have to go to jail to wait for their trial dates. They're going to be weighted in the community of Hispanics and black people. And the victims have to suffer through that because they're going to be afraid to speak up. They're going to be afraid to point the criminals out because they're in the neighborhood. Jail, you know, you mentioned my president, Donald Trump. And I have to tell you, President Trump is the best thing that can be happening to America right now because he will make it great again. And the Attorney General is about punishing the criminals, not making them feel like they are the victims. And I work with men and women who are out of jail, in and out of jail. And when they go to jail, it's like living at a hotel. They get TV, food, a great gym. They are not being punished. And you have to realize that these criminals do not follow the law of the heart. And if we take the law of the land away from them, they're not going to have anything to govern them. They're going to go out of control. And I have to tell you, the people who are pushing for a softer justice system are not living in these communities. In Chicago right now, in Baltimore is out of control. Black on black violence, out of control. They're killing each other in the streets every day to a point that the citizens, the black citizens, are asking for a ceasefire so that they can take a breath or something. And the reason that this is happening because the police cannot enforce the law anymore. If they do, they're called racist. If they do, they'll lose their, their jobs, their careers. We saw with Michael Brown. Michael Brown was a thug. His father and mother failed him. He had no good parents. They separated. Michael had to raise himself, so he had no love from his parents. So he went out in the street and became a thug. He robbed a store. That's not all that he's done. I write about him in my book, The Antidote, Healing America from the Poison of Hate, Blame, and Victimhood. Michael Brown was a thug, and instead of pointing it out and telling black parents that you need to get married and raise your children in the right way to go, that kids need a father and a mother, they blame it on racism. They blame it on white cops. And now that the cops are holding back, the criminals are going out of control. You know, a lot of us have thought that Barack Obama would do something about it, the first black president. Instead, he proved that he didn't care anything about black Americans. And the crime in Chicago went out of control. And no one said, oh, Barack didn't do anything about it. It must be racism. But because Barack Obama was a liberal Democrat, a socialist, weak person, no one said anything. And now the crime is out of control in Chicago. Somebody at some point got to punish these people because if they're not punished for their crimes, black American, Hispanic, and white America are going to suffer even more so. And the Attorney General is right. You need tougher crime. You don't need to soften the crime. You need drug addicts and alcoholics in jail and not roaming the streets. Right?
I actually want to
so that's what we want to do. We want tougher crime. Oh, one other thing did I have?
Real quick.
There are black women in these communities right now begging the government, begging the police department, do not let the drug dealers, do not let the drug addicts back into the communities. But because black people are not respected by these so-called leaders, they are being used for political gain. No one cares. So we need tougher crime, not softer ones.
I want to get Shermichael's response to that.
That's a lot. I mean, I think I'll first start with racism and Jeff Sessions. I think there are most certainly enough evidence that does indicate that people of color are disproportionately impacted as it pertains to the criminal justice system. I think, hold on. I think we merely have to take a look at the war on crime, Bill Clinton's crime bill. We saw disproportionately impacted over 1 million African American men. I am of the belief that I would have preferenced to spend that money on trying to educate these guys, trying to give them an opportunity to excel. I don't know any person who wakes up and says, I want to commit a crime. I don't know any mother, whether it's a single mother or a two-parent household, that has a child and says, you know, I hope my child becomes a criminal. I think these are far more complex issues than that, and we have to look at the root cause. And by sending in more police officers to Chicago, when it's quite obvious that the problems are far more deeply rooted than that, I think people at their core want an opportunity to succeed and to do well. And I think, hold on, and I think by simply saying that we're going to jail them by not focusing on trying to figure out how to educate the most number of people as possible so that they can have an opportunity to succeed. I think we're failing our people in our country by doing so. And I don't think anyone in this audience would advocate for not being tough against criminals, right? Who wants criminals in their neighborhood? Raise your hands. Nobody's raising their hands because no one wants criminals in their neighborhood. But no one. But we also want sensible. We want sensible, logical, and rational laws and legislation that pertains to criminal justice.
And I want to say that there is a reason for blacks and Hispanics committing crimes.
We need to figure out how we're going to do this panel, okay?
And the reason is,
we need to figure out how we're going to do the panel.
I'm speaking.
I know, but I think
but you can't speak over me. You need to hold on.
Yeah, but I mean,
hold
on.
Okay? You can't be rude to me. Thank you.
Very quick.
Right. I can't believe
it's not just me.
I want to say that there is a deeper cause for this. I do want to first say that there is no such thing as racism. Racism has never existed. It's a lie. It's a lie that's being used. It's a lie that's being used to divide and conquer, to keep black people angry at white folks and to keep white people afraid to speak up. The battle is, black Americans, not all, are suffering due to the destruction of the family and the lack of moral character. If they had fathers and mothers together, loving them and guiding them in the right way to go, they would not, you wouldn't see the type of crime.
So no plus plan never existed.
Congresswoman, get in on this.
And as far as Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter is a radical, evil, agitated organization that is worse.
I just want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak here. Thank you. Congresswoman.
And I wasn't just interrupting for me. We have to figure out how we're going to do this panel. If one person is going to be on the panel,
but you cannot interrupt me.
Things to do.
It's not up to you to decide that.
All right. Thank you, Congresswoman.
Anyway, the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So the war on drugs, the latest one, was launched in the 80s around crack cocaine. We didn't know very much about addiction at the time. I have a medical background. When we learned more about addiction, we learned that it was really kind of stupid to incarcerate people for a health issue.
And Jim Crow, and people were killed for trying to go vote. So, and act like it's disappeared over the last 50 years or so. That's also just a fantasy. And when we're talking about incarceration, we're talking about policing, there are absolutely no rigorous studies, facts, no body of data, no body of knowledge that says that tougher crime laws are better for reducing crime. What we do know, and what there are studies on, what people from all neighborhoods will tell you is that tougher crime laws put more people in prison. We know that. Keeping them in prison longer disrupts families more, it disrupts children, and keeping them from working, keeping people who come out of prison from working, and keeping them from voting, and keeping them from participating in their communities when they come back is another way to disrupt the community. So how can you say you are for the black family or for the Hispanic family and also say that you are for tougher crime laws? Because the one thing that disrupts families most, aside from unemployment, is crime law. Putting people in prison. So those two ideas are just incongruent. They don't work. We know for 30 years, for the entirety of my life, that's been post the height of the war on drugs, we know the reason why we're still here talking about crime and incarceration is that war did not work. We have to start thinking about new things, about figuring out what to do. You know, you have data, you have people telling you this stuff doesn't work, and you have the very reality we live in right now, which is that America has the most crime in most of the world. We incarcerate more people than most of the world by twice, and we still continue to have crime year after year. So what is the real issue? It's not the fact that our crime laws are not tough enough. It's just impossible.
Thank
You
you.
know, he mentioned the Jim Crow laws.
Feel free to line up on the microphones too. We can start some questions. Go ahead.
He mentioned the Jim Crow laws. I grew up in Alabama under the Jim Crow laws. We worked in a plantation. I grew up on a plantation. And during those days, you did not see black on black crime out of control. Black Americans were not going to jail for the most part. And the reason for that is that they had family. They had fathers and mothers in the home. The fathers and mothers were good examples. They taught their children not to hate their fellow man. They said that there were good and evil in all cultures, and we should treat people how we like to be treated. Less than 10% of black children were born out of wedlock, and what these liberals want to do is pass more laws that are not being enforced anyway. The solution to the black on black violence and to the black on white violence is family. It's not going to get better until 73% of black children are born out of wedlock. 73%. It is not going to get better until we restore the families. But the liberals don't want to do that because they want black Americans brainwashed, dumbed down, and demoralized in order to keep them in power. It's about that and nothing else. The family is the solution.
All right.
I agree with everything every one of you have said. I think most of us do. We want a beautiful country, we want a safe country. And we try to reform the drug laws, and it exacerbates the disintegration of the family. And there's much to say about family disintegrating where there's no father or mother in the foster care system. That makes the situation where kids are born into poverty, have no hope, there's no leadership. It's a tragic situation, but how could all these ideas, why is there no leader? Why is there no person that can see how we put these things together? You enact one reform and it tugs at something else.
How do we bring all these things together?
Find that common ground to
Well,
solve that problem.
I think there's a lot of common ground on this panel, actually, with maybe an exception. But I mean, I think that there's a lot of common in terms
I
of
wouldn't
how
do that
we
if I
do
was
this
you,
issue.
Kerry.
Well, legislation, how can you turn this
I
into
would not do
results?
that.
I would say that the problem is with the incentives, right?
Just so Kerry would know, I wouldn't do that. I don't take that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So don't do that.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
All right. Go ahead, Austin.
It's good drama, but I'll tell you, we're not
It's
learning.
not drama.
So I would say that the problem is with the incentives, right? So if you consider the issue of drug crime, right? The Milton Friedman once said that the role of the government is to protect the cartel. So when you consider this, the moneyed interests are not just on the table for the legitimate pharmaceutical industries, but there's also the illegitimate pharmaceutical industries as well. Because remember, the MS-13 gangs, they have an interest, a moneyed interest, in ensuring that drugs remain illegal. So for example, in Central America, they've had to start growing more coca leaves because the demand for marijuana has been destroyed, while Colorado, right? So it really has to do with the incentives. We're incentivizing crime by creating bad laws. So but it will take a sincere and alert citizenry in order for us to change the incentives so that when people are going to do something that is a crime now, in the future it's a chemical issue, we the people have to stand up, because the Constitution, as George W. Bush famously said, is just a GD piece of paper. We the people have to defend it. It's up to us.
Okay. Thank you.
Certain laws, and one of the laws that we passed was, you know, if you're a felon, I mean, you can't work, you can't get financial aid, you know, you can't get a lot of housing. If you do all of that, then you force people into the illegal economy. If you don't allow them to reintegrate into the legal economy, so we need to rethink that. For example, in the state of California, when I was in the state legislature, there are 56 occupations that you could not have if you had a felony record. One was barbering. We taught and we teach barbering in state prison, and then didn't allow people to get a barbering license. So we went and tried to change those laws. We have to reintegrate people in with legal employment, or they will continue to offend.
I feel like it's parents that have to teach their son morals and values on what they do when growing up, and to be aware. And I think that when there comes a lack of family being present, it can emotionally and personally affect a person's life. And it kind of has for me, not being with my father. So, but one of the things is like to kind of motivate or find ways that the community can get people with or single mothers, single fathers to move forward with their kids. And the question is that how can we, as a community, find a way to, reach out to these parents that don't speak out for their kids, or because they're having different financial hardships where they can't get the help and they either can't afford it or can't reach out to it.
Okay, so I'll take that one. Yeah, go ahead. I grew up in a community where drugs, where incarceration, where people get stopped and sometimes killed by the police, were problems constantly. So family members and good friends who are in prison, and I'm the only person of my cohort that graduated and ended up with a job. I think, lots of them are fathers now, and they don't see their kids. Lots of folks like that. I think what we don't talk about enough is sort of the overlapping layers of community responsibility, of looking out for our brothers, looking out for our sisters, and being good people and human beings. We have more responsibility, I think, to go out and make sure that all the kids in our communities are taken care of. And that's not just our neighborhoods, our little racial blocks or whatever. It's saying, look, as a city, we, in whatever city, in Los Angeles, in Pasadena, want our community, the kids in our community, to do well. And we're going to do everything we can to make life good for those people. And sometimes that means taking up the slack for people who aren't doing what they're supposed to do. And I think that's good governance. That's what I think the preamble says we should do. Again, a more perfect union. We need to go out and build America, cities, communities, and families that look out for each other.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Given the fact that I've also been a former probation officer and I've also been a parole agent. And I see all the different points, except for kind of one. But what I want to get to is saying, it's kind of in a way of a question, is the problem, agreed, with not being able to find employment. Too many people, I had that problem, that they couldn't find a job or they couldn't find somewhere to live. And as well as the plea agreement situation. Too many times people were taking plea agreements on something that they really did not do. The other aspect of it is that we're spending the money on the back end, which is why it's getting so darn expensive, instead of on the front end. And whether it's a congresswoman or one looking to be in office, a senator, in terms of working on legislation to spend more on the education aspect and on transitional age youth. If we can deal with the TAs, the transitional age youth, that's a big area, and children in terms of the education opportunities and the job training opportunities. We used to have, they had shopping stuff in the high schools so that people could come out with a trade. And we don't do that for our children anymore.
Let me just say that I work on the foster care system. When she was referring to transition age youth, when foster children who don't have parents, right, or probation, when they don't have parents, when they turn 18, we essentially put them on the street and then say good luck to you. But, so I work a lot on foster care legislation, and the reason I do is because the foster care system is the driver system for the criminal justice system. Because a large percentage of those young people wind up incarcerated. So we as a society can make a choice. We can spend a smaller amount of money on the front end, or we can support these people for the rest of their lives when we incarcerate them.
A lot of times people sit in jail longer than they need to because it takes a long time before the trial come up. So if we can move them through the system faster, then those people wouldn't have to pay for that. We can find out they're guilty or innocent. But they sit in there for years and sometimes months to a year or so. Then you find out that they were innocent. So we need to reform the justice system to make it work.
But if I can just say that, it's so interesting. I think this is a great dialogue, but we talk about the justice system. How about focusing on making sure they never go in the first place? And I'm not sure why that hasn't come up. I think when you look at a lot of these issues as it pertains to, I think Chicago, you mentioned, a lot of these young people are acting out on violence, etc., because there are no opportunities. So the millions of dollars that we're spending on more police, the billions of dollars we're spending to build more prisons, why not focus on building more libraries, or providing more resources, or focusing on trade skills in high schools, which is what I believe you mentioned earlier. So again, it makes more logical and practical sense to focus on these things early on, at the front, versus saying, well, we'll let whatever happen, and then when they commit crime or get in trouble, we'll just put them in prison. That isn't logical to me.
You mentioned about black on black crime and how that wasn't really prevalent during the Jim Crow laws, but the Jim Crow laws weren't long before the war on drugs started. And that's something, the Jim Crow laws put a lot of African Americans, a lot of other minorities into jail for either no apparent reason or for very small offenses. Wouldn't you agree that that was one of the stepping stones to sort of separating families that you advocate for?
Well, the Jim Crow law wasn't a just law, but that law was created by the government at that time. And it wasn't all white people who were for that. Most people were against it. But because there were families, because there was fathers and mothers raising their children, and they respected one another and others, you didn't have blacks committing the kind of crimes, or as many crimes as you see today. Yes, the Jim Crow law, under the Jim Crow law, some people were put in jail unfairly, but that's not what's happening right now. And if you notice, there is no real emphasis on the real solution. And the real solution is building families. Kids need fathers and mothers. And even under Jim Crow law, because they had families, you know, I don't know anybody in my family who went to jail. You know, I don't know anybody even around me who went to jail because that respect was there and the love of the family. These boys and girls are growing up feeling the lack of love. They don't know what to do with themselves because they have not been guided in the right way. And unless we solve that family problem, it's only going to get worse rather than getting better. And one last point to that, we don't need government in our lives. We need parents. And the government is never, ever, ever going to solve your problem. The government is going to keep you in the same hell generation after generation. Your problems are not going to change until you take control of your problems. And the way it was with black Americans before the government took over.
So I just have to say something, because I'm sure that my colleague over here, and I'm just concerned, especially for young folks who might not know what Jim Crow laws were. That was when we had apartheid in the United States, when people were racially divided by law. Water faucets, you know, places to eat, everything. So I just want to be clear, because I know that he is not saying that we should be nostalgic for Jim Crow, and that when we had Jim Crow, life was better in African American communities. I think it's so important not to look at these complex social and economic issues in a simplistic manner, and that there's a lot of reasons for the problems that exist in our community. And I would agree with him 100% that family disruption is key. It is not everything. It is not the only thing. African American families have been disrupted from when we were brought over here. Our families were divided. And so I just want to be clear, because I'm sure that he is not saying that.
And I will say that has never been a time.
I want to say that she's right in that I remember the blacks owning water fountains. I went to all black school on the plantation, but because that anchor wasn't there, they saw that the law was wrong, and that the law that governed and protect white Americans need to protect black Americans. And so had they just changed the laws so that the law would treat everybody the same, and then left black folks alone and left white folks alone, we would come together naturally. But they took it further by bringing the government and telling the government that black people don't need a daddy. They need the government to be the daddy, and the so-called black leadership to head other people. So the fathers went away, and they went to hell in a handbasket.
Okay,
it's that same government.
My question was
legislation that changed those things.
My question was that wouldn't you agree that Jim Crow laws were one of those factors that separated many African American families and caused that sort of, you know, this family that's what I was asking.
No, Jim Crow law did not separate black families. They kept apart.
It certainly did.
They kept apart.
Well, I mean, the ones that were sent to jail.
We're not going to sit here and argue the validity of Jim Crow. Come on. Stop this. Stop this.
There's been no time in American history where black people were arrested at the same time as
Jim
white
Crow
people.
law did not separate black from
You've
black
said that
families.
several times
They
now.
separated
Let somebody
black
else
from white
speak.
people.
I think the reality is that the black family was much more intact during Jim Crow. That is a fact. So I'm not sure why you would dismiss what Reverend Petersen is saying. My question is for Representative Bass and also Mr. Van. I hear you guys defending felons and criminals and making all kinds of excuses. What about the victims in the black and Hispanic communities? Why don't you, I don't hear you guys speaking about the victims. Are you making excuses? Why is that? And do you believe that convicted criminals should be incarcerated?
Victims of the
I think you were asking me, do I think why don't I talk about victims?
One, yeah. Why do you
First
make
of all-
excuses for felons, but you never talk about the victims? Felons victimize
Okay, I got your
to
question.
become
So
felons.
we talk about victims an awful lot. I've been a victim. Okay,
I haven't
a lot
heard
of
you
people
once
have.
mention victims.
Do you want me to answer?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So I think it's important to talk about victims, absolutely. Now there is a victims' right movement in this country, and actually I think that some of those people, and I saw this in Sacramento all the time, were essentially used by police departments and law enforcement to fight for to fight for laws that just led to more and more incarceration. You have to take a holistic approach where you can't just look at one side or the other. And so the victims are absolutely critical. I work with an organization called Mothers of Murdered Children. It is absolutely critical.